Okay, we're being live streamed now, and I'm glad to see you all here. Today is Ekadasi Day and Vamanadev's appearance day, and for those of a Jewish background, they celebrate a Day of Atonement in which coincidentally, it usually lines up with the Ekadasi, a day of fasting and meditating on relationship with God. So we have the convergence of holy days by the lunar calendars. So on these auspicious days, it's nothing better than to hear about the activities of the Supreme Person. With that, we shall begin. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Well, everyone, welcome. Let me see who's here. As I usually request, I ask those who are no longer in an embarrassing position of still being in bed and kind of listening in the background to please turn on your video. I realize not all of you can do it because of your circumstances, and some are driving and some are doing this and that. And but if you can, I'd like to see you. I could be a wise guy. You see, here's what it's like from your end. You see, now you see what it looks like from your end. So if this is what you wouldn't want to see this for the next 30, 40 minutes. So if you can, I'd like to see who's there. Today, there's no particular verse, but we're talking about Vamanadeva. Now, Vamanadeva, you might say, dwarfs all the other incarnations. Okay, that was funny. Anyway, Vamanadeva, there was Napoleon was a very short person. And so there's an old joke. What's the comparison of Napoleon and Vamanadeva? Can anybody guess what Napoleon and Vamanadeva had in common? Well, I'll tell you. Yes. Agape, it says.
Agape for good.
Agape, yes.
What
do they have in common?
They both conquered the world.
Yeah, and they both, but that's true. And they both thought they were God. And one of them was, as it turns out. They both thought they were God. Now, a dwarf is an unusual character. We'll ask you this, and you can raise your hands who has a video on. Who here has seen the 1939 movie, The Wizard of Oz? Who has seen that movie? I think everyone would have seen it. Okay, in The Wizard of Oz, what they did is they gathered every dwarf they could find to be the Munchkins. So every dwarf, especially where it was filmed, I think in California, but every dwarf they could gather had a job being a Munchkin, because they didn't have audio, they didn't have computer graphics. So they gathered all the dwarfs together, and it kind of brought dwarfism to prominence in America. Before, dwarfs were kind of considered some odd creature. And then when The Wizard of Oz came, it changed kind of America's attitude towards dwarfs. But still, dwarfs are considered, what are they? Are they adults or are they children? Because you look at like this little man. And I have devotee friends who are dwarfs, and they live a little bit of an interesting life, because sometimes people walk up to them and they're fully grown, mature, intelligent people, and people walk up to them and start speaking to them so what would you like to be when you grow up? And start speaking to them like they're children. So this happens. So a dwarf is different, and it creates a different impression. And you don't expect a dwarf to be very powerful because they kind of look like a child, though the facial features will be grown up. The bodily stature is that of a child. So it's a very special incarnation. So Lord Vamanadeva appeared first in his four-armed form, and then he reverted to the dwarf form. So we understand he's fully an avatar, and he came to rescue the demigods. Now, the demigods had, by this point in time, been in a bad position. Durvasa Muni, he's an interesting character. Do any of you know someone who's a grouch? I mean, just a real grouch. I mean, they may actually be even an advanced devotee. I know a devotee like that, senior devotee, but he's always grouchy about something. And Durvasa Muni is just one of these people that you wonder, how is it 365 days a year he gets out of the wrong side of his bed? And that's what he's like. He's grouchy. And Indra can be sometimes gets a little proud of his position. We saw that in Krishna Leela, and we saw it certainly with Govardhan Hill. Sometimes Indra a little bit goes to his head. And the lesson is simple. Every single time it goes to Indra's head, something goes wrong. It's kind of like hunting. Some people bring up, hey, there's hunters in the Bhagavatam. There certainly are. And read their story, and every time something goes bad. That story never ends well for the hunters, even if it's authorized. Sometimes when I was living in India, I was an itinerant school teacher. And so I had a little 60cc motorcycle to go from one town to another, very slow. And I was asking directions. There was no Google Maps. There were no maps. There were no street signs or anything. So how do I get from this village to that village? Well, you go through this forest, and you, when you come across that certain building there, you can make a right turn, etc. And then the fellows give me directions, said, by the way, how are you getting there? So I'm taking this little putt-putt scooter, motorcycle. He says, oh, that's a very bad idea. I said, well, why is that? He said, there's that woods. This is now it's Jharkhand state, or forest there. There are Bengal tigers in those woods, and they run much faster than your motor scooter. You would not be the first one to become lunch. And I said, oh, so instead of a 3-hour putt-putt ride, I ended up on a 9-hour multiple train ride, because I took the long way around, because I didn't want to become lunch. So anyway, I digress a little bit, but the hunters in the Bhagavatam, they're necessary to thin out the forest from tigers, because then if the tigers are hungry and the lions and tigers are hungry, they'll start going into the villages and eating animals and people. So the Kshatriyas were allowed to thin out the forest to practice their skills, but every time they do it, they get a bad reaction. So we can see it's mixed, a mixed circumstance here. So we see the same thing with Indra. He can do certain things, and he's supposed to have a certain pride, king of heaven and all. But when the pride overtakes him, there's always a bad reaction, kind of like with the hunters. So in this case, Indra was given a garland by Durvasa Muni, and he tossed it on the trunk of his elephant. Now, okay, when I get a garland, I always like to share it. But sharing a garland with an elephant does not result in usually a respect for the garland. And the elephant just kind of let the garland fall off between its giant legs and it crushed it to smithereens. So Davarsa Muni wasn't very happy with this and he cursed Indra to be poor. And then with that, the demons, headed by, oddly enough, Bali Maharaj, who was the grandson of Hiranyakasipu, defeated heaven, and Indra and others had to flee, and they basically became something all of you in New York are very familiar with. When somebody becomes very poor in New York, what do they become? Somebody tell me. You can all unmute yourselves if you like. Somebody's poor in New York, what happens to them?
They become a homeless person.
A homeless person. Subways are full of them now. Try to find a seat on a subway when they're all stretched out on there. Become homeless. And in a very similar way, the denizens of heaven were going, they had no home. They were hiding. They had to become invisible and hide. They're going here and there. And Indra's kingdom was taken away and they became homeless. And if any of you have been homeless, you know it's not a very comfortable position to be in. So we have the demigods becoming homeless, the demons ruling, but the demons were headed by Bali Maharaj. Though he was born in a demon family, he was a great devotee. He was a grandson of Prahlad. So just imagine. But the great-grandson of Hiranyakasipu and the nephew of Hiranyaksha. And Hiranyakasipu and Hiranyaksha, they were kind of in the category of, Stalin and Hitler. They just tried to destroy everything, or in the category of maybe of a recent president we had. I won't mention names. I mean, they're in a bad, nasty category. So Bali Maharaj is there. Now, Bali Maharaj has a guru. His guru is Professor White. Now, who is Professor White? Can somebody tell me who Professor White is? Who is Professor White? That's his name, Professor White. You all know him. Anybody who's read the story knows Professor White. So who is Professor White?
Is it Sukracharya?
Of course, that's the translation into English, Sukracharya, Professor White. That translates as Professor White. Okay, so that's the English translation of Sukracharya. Charya is professor and White, he's Professor White. So we have Professor White here, Sukracharya. And Sukracharya is a typical, you might say, Smartana Brahmin, very concerned with rituals and procedures. Now, I know many of my Indian brethren, before they joined ISKCON, were initiated by the family priest. And the family priests were often Sukracharyas. They were concerned with the rituals. And sometimes some of my very sincere Indian brethren come and say, can I get initiated again when I've already been initiated by my family guru? So Sukracharya is like that, the family guru. So sometimes that issue arises, So Sukracharya then understood the position of Vamanadeva. So Vamanadeva came to rescue the demigods. Now, Krishna says, whenever there's a decline in religion, I appear. Most recently, Krishna appeared as who? Who did Krishna appear as recently?
Lord Chaitanya.
Lord Chaitanya. Who is Krishna appearing as today on September 16th, 2021? He's appearing right now. Ooh, this is a tough question.
Has the holy name?
Yes, that's the holy name. Very good answer. Who said that? Who said that? Very good. Thank you. Good answer. He appears, well, we say there are no incarnations left, that 500 years ago, Columbus is sailing to America and Lord Chaitanya is appearing in India. But that means incarnation is over. No, the holy name. Very good answer. Thank you very much. Lord Chaitanya the avatar is still present. So Vamanadeva appeared in this odd incarnations of dwarf. There are odder incarnations. There's a hog, and there's a turtle, and we had some really interesting incarnations. But in this case, it's a dwarf. And a dwarf, it's basically a very small. He appears as a very small man, and very innocent looking. And that's part of his, certainly might say, disguise, appearing as a dwarf. No one expects a dwarf to cause much trouble. I mean, they're little guys. And again, when we see there were thousands of munchkins in The Wizard of Oz, but none of them could deal with the horrible witches because they're little guys. They can't. What can they do? So here we get this little guy, very innocent, and he appears. And when he appeared, and when Vamanadeva appeared in front of Bali Maharaj, he was so effulgent, and just everyone, it just caught their breath when he walked in the room. Everyone just couldn't even hardly breathe. And he's there appearing very humble, just with his water pot. And when he appeared there, immediately they recognized that this is a great Brahmin. And they offered him all respects, and they did the things you must do. And then what do you do when a great Brahmin appears in your home? Well, you offer a sitting place, you offer to wash feet, and then what do? You offer, especially if you're a king, you offer gifts. Whenever a great devotee comes to my house, I'm always thinking, what gift can I give them? Do I have a book? Do I have some prasadam? What gift can I give? It's just natural to do that. So Bali Maharaj says, what would you like? Would you like some land? Nice to give somebody some land or some cows. What would you like? The little dwarf says, just 3 steps. I mean, my steps would be much more land than the steps of a dwarf. I have a bigger stride, and some of you who are 6 feet or 7 feet tall, 3 steps would even be more land, but it's still a tiny, tiny amount of land. And for a dwarf, it's almost infinitesimal. 3 little, like childlike steps. Said, I just like 3 steps of land. Now, Sukacharya, when he heard this, it's great depth. He understood this is the enemy of the demons, of the asuras. And he's going to take everything. He said, stop. Do not follow your promise. Now, when we make a promise, we're supposed to keep our promises. But there are certain conditions, it's described. Let me turn to that verse, where you can break your promises. Some of you may be very interested in those verses. You might have had some promises you're worried about now. So for those who are very concerned about breaking promises, let me give you a few good excuses. And this brings us to the Jewish holiday today, because the Jewish holiday day is about promises. And it specifically encourages promises between, it's very relevant for the Jewish holiday for this particular verse, because the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur is concerned with promises I made to God. And one of the promises and things I said that I shouldn't have said. And one of the things that I said I shouldn't have said in the Jewish tradition is I made a promise to God. because making a vow to God in the Jewish tradition is problematic because you can never quite keep all of your vows. You're going to have some discrepancy. So better you not make any promises. And so therefore you have to atone for even making a promise. But then again, you ought to be making promises. It's one of these paradoxical issues. And we find paradox is a way we learn and get deeper. So in the Jewish tradition, it's a very paradoxical issue. And then many, whatever promise I made to God, for example, some of you had made your own particular vratas or your own particular vows, but you may not have been perfect at keeping it. My vow is going to be to listen when I chant my rounds from now on. All of us have made that vow at some point. I would like everyone who's always kept that vow to stand up. Okay, everyone's still seating. Okay, so we're all going to make some vows that we're going to have trouble keeping. Anybody who doesn't do that isn't being honest with themselves. I'm not saying we should break vows, but we do. Anybody wants to get deeper into the psychology of understanding how this works can listen to the amazing, wonderful, and I've mentioned this before, Cure of Souls lecture series by Ravindra Sarup. You can just Google Ravindra Cure of Souls. It's a lecture series on the struggle of taking vows that we may not always be up to, and what that does to us psychologically and how the modes of nature interact with it. It is one of the most brilliant, necessary lecture series I've ever seen. So in the Bhagavatam, it says, this is curious, Prabhupada knew better than to give a purport to this verse, because the verse has some controversial statements in it. So Prabhupada just let it stand as it is. Sometimes he would do that. So I will read you the verse. In flattering a woman to bring her, these are, let me go back. This is speaking here is Sukacharya, Professor White. He says, it's a safe course to say no, even if you made a vow. Although it's a falsehood, it protects one completely. He says, he gives a few arguments, Sukacharya. His first argument is a vow doesn't count unless you say Om first or some Vedic ritual that way. So since when you made your promise of 3 steps, you didn't say, Om, I give you 3 steps. It's not a true Vedic vow. So he gives some argument that way. And anyway, we understand that argument's not worth very much. Our word means a lot. We have from the Mahabharata, we have Yudhishthira who would never tell a lie. But he did tell a lie on the battlefield. He said, Asvatthama is dead to discourage his enemy, that you're thinking it was Asvatthama, the son, who had died, but it wasn't the son, it was Asvatthama. It was an elephant named Asvatthama. So he told what we would call a white lie. It's sort of true, but not true. As we say in the judiciary, the truth, the whole truth, but sometimes it's not everything but the truth. So that was an example. So here he's saying, he said, if you give everything away, you'll be without money. Sukacharya is arguing. For in that position, one cannot fill one's desires. In other words, by using the word Om, if you said Om, then you would have to give everything away and become poverty-stricken. And if you give everything to a beggar, then somehow you're going to be unfulfilled. And you're going to be poor and you can't get your senses satisfied, and then you're going to become bewildered. And he was saying, you don't want to be like the demigods who are even homeless. Come on. Or Prabhupada came to New York. The first place he came to second place. I mean to say, third place, first Butler, Pennsylvania, Upper West Side, Lower East Side. And Lower East Side in those days was not so gentrified as it is now. And even though you still have the Bowery Relief Center, that during those days, and I used to hang out in New York in those days, the Bowery bums were everywhere. All the homeless in New York would congregate in the Lower East Side, and they would hang out, and there's still that famous soup kitchen there, and sleep on the streets, and sometimes defecate in the doorsteps. And it's not as bad now as it was, but it was very a lot of homeless. So you're saying you don't want to be like that. And then he says, in flattering a woman to bring her under control, in joking, in a marriage ceremony, in earning one's livelihood, one's life is in danger, in protecting cows and Brahminical culture, or in protecting a person from an enemy, falsity is never condemned. Wow, that's a heavy verse. In flattering a woman, ooh. I mean, as Brahmins, we do condemn that, in fact. But for those, remember, he's guru of the demons, so he's preaching demons. Well, if you're flattering a woman, you can lie a little bit. Oh, you have beautiful hair, and then muttering under the breath, but you'd be prettier bald with that stuff, and whatever. But men will flatter women, women will flatter men in order to establish some relationship. These things, we're not naive. These things go on. I could embarrass you all and ask, who here has ever been flattered by the opposite sex with false statements about how wonderful they are? Okay, I won't embarrass you by having you raise your hand, but we all know it's happened. Now I can ask a more difficult question. Which of you has thought of flattering the opposite sex with flattering words? And those who have been married know that you always, you never say, let's say a man, you never say to your wife words like this: you look so slim in that dress, because immediately the response would be, are you saying I look fat in my other dresses? And that never goes over well. So, but it's normal. There's some flattery goes on. And in joking, of course, in joking, we can say so many things that aren't true. It's natural when we joke to say things like that. Prabhupada would actually joke a lot. One time, I was in my Prabhupada's room, he was with his godbrothers, they're all laughing and laughing and laughing. And I was wondering later on, it was Bengali, I said, what are they laughing at? Well, when they had their reunion, they were discussing the nicknames they had for each other, like, hey, Shorty, or whatever funny name they had for each other. They all had nicknames for each other, just joking around that way. I mean, it's not that they're really calling the person that. So in joking, all of us will say things that aren't true. That's how jokes work. It's the nature of it. And in a marriage ceremony. Now, I'm not sure what the heck that means in that verse. That's right from the Bhagavatam. So when I was preparing for class, I was wondering, oh my gosh, I hope no one asked that question, so don't you dare ask. But in a marriage ceremony. But we do say many vows in a marriage ceremony. So I can't figure that one out. In earning one's livelihood, Prabhupada gives the example many times. I'm a shopkeeper. From you, I make no profit. And Panchagoda, who's a wonderful president of the Vrindavan temple, wonderful fellow, my dear friend. So Panchagoda learned Hindi, and he speaks fluent Hindi, but he's a Westerner, looks like me. And so Panchagoda went into a shop one time. He says, I want to buy such and such. And the shopkeeper is speaking in Hindi to his colleague saying, we got this white guy here who doesn't know his head from his rear end. Should we charge him 10 times as much or 20 times as much? And they're having this conversation in Hindi. It's going on. And we'll tell him that the supplier has upped our prices, all lies. And we'll tell him this and we'll tell him that lie. And then finally, after they finish their conversation, they turn to him and give him a price. And Panchagota then responds in Hindi. Ooh, were they embarrassed? And then he got the price he wanted because they were terribly embarrassed. So it's like that. Shopkeepers, their mantra is, from you, I make no profit. If you go to a car dealer in America, going to a car dealer in America is like going to a bazaar in India. They all have the same lines. So, in earning one's livelihood, it's not considered sinful to say, from you, I make no profit. One's life is in danger. Has anybody here had their life in danger? Yeah, you've had it. I've had guns pointed at me. I mean, when that happens, you're willing to say anything. There was this American comedian, Jack Benny, who was the funniest American of my generation. And he was known, his persona was known as a cheapskate. He might not have been, but his persona was known. So one of his most famous lines is, a thief walks up to him, pulls out the gun and says, your money or your life? Your money or your life? And he didn't answer. And the thief says, didn't you hear me? I said your money and your life. And remember, he has a persona of a cheapskate. And he goes, I'm thinking. Anyway, that was a famous line. But in that case, he wasn't lying. He was telling the truth. He was just thinking. But if somebody walked up to me and said, my money or my life, I might say to them, I'm sorry, I'll give you everything I have, but I only have $5 on me. That's my left pocket. Now my right pocket may have a lot more money. So we might say things like that. We might lie if our life's in danger. That's not, to preserve your life is considered okay. Prabhupada even told his disciples that first went to Poland in the middle of the winter. Prabhupada saw a white older lady dancing at Artik in Calcutta. And Prabhupada said, that's unusual. And he asked the devotees, who is she? A middle-aged white lady in Calcutta in the early 70s dancing at Artik. That's an odd sight. And Prabhupada said, she is the wife of the Consul General of Poland, and she likes Artik. And Prabhupada immediately saw Krishna's hand, and he said, see if she can get us a visa to go behind the Iron Curtain. That was Soviet Union-controlled territory. And she went to her husband and got devotees visas. Americans couldn't go behind the Iron Curtain then, and got devotees visas to go to Poland. So devotees went in the winter, Harikesh and others went, very brave, went in the winter in Poland to start preaching. And it was such a difficult time. There was nothing to eat unless you were rich, or meat, plenty of meat. So devotees came back emaciated, as if they had been in some concentration camp. And Prabhupada said to him, what happened to you? Said, Prabhupada, a few nuts, this, unless you're very wealthy, there's nothing to eat in the winter in Poland, but we just preach anyway. Then Prabhupada said to him amazing words, then eat meat. And Harikesh goes, what about my consciousness? And Prabhupada goes, damn your consciousness, preach. What a heavy statement. In other words, to live, Prabhupada said, if you had to eat meat to preach, you could. Now, I've talked a lot about this incident with Harikesh. Prabhupada never intended for them to eat meat, just to be clear. But he did want to make the point of preaching is above everything else. And sometimes you have to adjust to preach. But it wasn't, he was setting the example of making preaching a priority. It wasn't the intent that the next wave of devotees go there and go to the local McDonald's in Poland. That clearly wasn't. But the idea was, in order to save your life, your life's in danger. Their life was actually in danger. Sometimes you have to do odd things. In protecting cows in Brahminical culture, we can lie too, or in protecting a person from an enemy's hands. Falsity is never condemned. We have the story of the Mahabharata of the sage. He's sitting in the woods meditating. Om. Everything's peaceful, quiet place in the woods, and two people come running by, and they go, dacoits are chasing us. The thieves are chasing us. We're going to the right. Don't tell them which way we went. And then the thieves come and they come upon the stage and they say, stage, which way did they go? And he goes, I cannot lie. I cannot tell a lie. They went to the right. And then the thieves went after, caught them and killed them to get their money. And later that sage went to hell because he should not have told the truth. So there are times, this is a story Yudhishthira told, there are times when you just can't tell the truth. Usually, in the Gita, the quality of a Brahmin is given that he's truthful. And generally, we're truthful. But here, in this particular case, there are the arguments Sukracharya is given not to be truthful. And Sukracharya, when Bali Maharaj was thus advised by his spiritual master, Dr. White, his family priest, he remained silent for some time. And then after full deliberation, he replied to his spiritual master as follows. You have said the principle of religion that does not hinder one's economic development, sense gratification, fame, and means and livelihood is the real occupational duty of the householder. I also think that this religious principle is correct. And I'm the grandson of Prahlad. I cannot withdraw my promise because of greed for money when I have already said that I shall give this land. How can I behave like an ordinary cheater towards a Brahmin? There is nothing more sinful than untruthfulness. Because of this, Mother Earth once said, and this is a very important line, I can bear any heavy thing except a person who is a liar. When Kali when we have the Kali attacking the bull of religiosity and knocking off the legs of true mercy and cleanliness, and the last leg standing in Kali Yuga and austerity. The last leg standing in Kali Yuga was truthfulness. And now with the internet full of conspiracy theories and lies and everybody, I'm director of the Bhakti Institute. I can't tell you the silly conspiracy theories that come across my desk daily. I wake up every day to some devotee asking about some conspiracy theory. There are so many lies out there. The burden of the earth with lies is the worst burden for the earth. And as devotees, I try to knock down these conspiracy theories so we try to be truthful. It's the most dangerous thing. So here, because of this, Mother Earth once said, I can bear any heavy thing except a person who is a liar. I do not fear hell, poverty, an ocean of distress, fall down my position, even death, as much as I fear cheating a Brahmin. So we have this conundrum. Does he tell the truth or does he lie? What should he do? And this is a dilemma we face as devotees. On the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Yudhishthira had to say Ashvatthama was dead. It was something he usually wouldn't speak. But sometimes a lie is necessary, sometimes truth is necessary. Generally, our default position is always the truth. That is the Brahminical thing. The lie is clearly the rare exception. There is, in the my early devotional days, Prabhupada used to use this English expression, by hook or by crook. And so devotees were thinking, well, we can do anything for Krishna. Crooked. There was the Chicago Seven, were a famous group of hippies that protested at the Democratic Convention, anti-war protesters. They were protesting President Johnson, and they were arrested and went on trial. And one of them was named Abbie Hoffman, and he was the ultimate hippie. And he wrote a book, and the name of the book was Steal This Book. In other words, when you go in the bookstore, steal it. And that was the name of the book. So there was this idea that brahminical qualities, that there are something higher than honesty. So, and sometimes at devotees, we face this dilemma. Our default condition is always to tell the truth, but sometimes there are exceptions. And this hook or crook mentality was exacerbated by the Abbie Hoffman mentality of steal this book. So devotees would, like one time, we wanted to decorate the deities. So we went to the botanical garden in Houston. This was way before there were webcams or anything. And we picked every single one of thousands of roses at 2 a.m. And we brought it back and decorated the deities. And the next day, the newspaper had the headlines, somebody stole every rose from the botanical garden. Of course, they would grow back. But I wonder if we got caught, would it be worth it? Would that have been the right thing to do? But we were in the mentality of hook or crook. What we didn't know is what a crook is. Does anybody know what, in the expression hook, by hook or crook, what crook means? Can somebody tell me, please? You've all heard the expression by hook or by crook, I imagine. Prabhupada would say it, and it's an old English expression. What does crook mean? Somebody take a guess, please.
Is crook like the shepherd's crook?
Yes, it's a shepherd's crook. It's a hook. It's another kind of hook. So by hook or by crook means this kind of hook or that kind of hook, how a shepherd does it sheep. It doesn't mean crook as if in a thief. But when Prabhupada said by hook or crook, we were thinking, oh, for Krishna, we can do all kinds of crooked things and ruin the reputation of movement. That's okay. It was silly, immature. A hook or crook has nothing to do with being a thief. So the default position, to be honest, sometimes we may have to say things in order for the sake of a higher purpose. We have to be cautious. We have to do it only rarely. And so here, Bali Maharaj gives all the arguments why he should defy his guru. And ultimately, the final argument is this: the purpose of my guru is to take me to Vishnu. And if my guru is telling me not to worship Vishnu, then I cannot follow that guru. And that takes us back to the original point I made when my Indian brethren join the movement more often than not. Most Indian families, they say, we have a family guru. And I say, that guru is taking you to Vishnu. Fine. If that guru is just teaching you rituals for karma kanda, then that guru is not taking you to Vishnu. And you can take initiation within ISKCON. And so that takes us to 8 o'clock. This is some of the story of the wonderful Vamanadeva. As we know then, Bali Maharaj said, take your 3 steps. And he took 1 step, which was all the universes other than heaven. The second step was heaven, and there was no 3rd step. So at that point, Garuda came with his rope snake and bound Bali Maharaj. You made a promise to Vishnu and you didn't keep it. You promised 3 steps and there's no other place for him to step. And it's so ironic. This is a dwarf who's so small, but his steps cover the whole universe. That's the beautiful irony of this. And so you're a prisoner now. Sorry. People, demons are very upset. Their king is taken prisoner and they start attacking And of course, that didn't go well for them. And Bali Maharaj said, stop, I made my promise. I'm a prisoner now. And finally, Bali Maharaj thought, there's one more place that he can take a step. And I give him that one more place. And that is the top of my head. He hasn't stepped there yet. And with that, Bali Maharaj was blessed with the Lord's feet on his head and was given his own wonderful planet, and everything ended happily ever after. So with that, we will stop here. This is the glories of Vamanadeva, the dilemma of when you tell the truth and when you don't tell the truth. And a few of the lessons to be learned is always tell the truth unless there's a really pressing reason not to. Make sure you compliment your spouse if it's the truth or not. That was given in the verse. And life goes on. Are there any questions or comments here?
Brahmatirtha
Hare
Prabhu.
Krishna, Brahmatirtha Prabhu. It's Andrea.
Yes. Andrea, nice to see you. I see my friend Yasoda and Andrea and Leela. Others I don't see cameras on, but I see. So I was happy to see you all. Who had a question? Did Yasoda Prabhu or Andrea? One of you had a
Well,
question?
Andrea can go
Andrea, I
first.
just had a quick comment. I just wanted to share with everyone that we're actually sharing where there's a second appearance day that we can celebrate today, which is of our dear Leela Prabhu, who's
Oh,
with us.
yes. It's Leela's birthday today. Okay, let's go for it. Everybody on mute. On mute. Andrea, begin the song.
Hare Krishna to you. Hare Krishna to you. Hare Krishna, dear Leela. Hare Krishna to you.
Very good. Yes. And we'll see you later, Leela. We have something for your birthday. Leela's here in Florida with me. She's one of our senior managers at the Bhaktivedanta Institute. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Andrea, you can come over later if you like to. Okay, Yasoda Dulal Prabhu, my dear friend.
How are you, Brahmatirtha Prabhu? Great to see you. We exchanged text just yesterday, but nice to see you. I watched on Radhika and I watched on YouTube for the most part, primarily because I knew you would ask all those difficult questions and I didn't want to answer them and be embarrassed. So, I'm happy that some people did. but I had a comment and a question. So my comment was, looking at all the mendacious, seemingly truthful advice, but really, deep down, very, cunning or wrong advice that Shukracharya, Professor White, was giving Vamanadeva. And, knowing the nature of the material world, it's so important to have gurus, a Diksha guru, but also Shiksha gurus who tell us, who are able to help us see through lies and conspiracy theories and things that act against our spiritual best interest. So, that was a comment because it's really important to know truth from fiction if we want to progress spiritually. Otherwise, we can get lost with, glass imitation diamonds.
Yes.
So my question was, Bali Maharaj, was in a demoniac family, but he was a devotee of Krishna. Why then did he pursue his agenda against the demigods, knowing that the demigods are also devotees of Krishna?
So why did Bali Maharaj do that?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a very insightful question. It's one that has crossed my mind. Hey, it's why did Bhishma fight on the wrong side? It's a sense of duty. He's born, he's made king of the demons, so he has to take care of them. Whenever we're a king, we have to take care of our charges. If I'm a temple president, I have to take care of people. If I'm a king, I have to take care of people. If I'm have a family. I have to take care of people. So he was the seminal king, by succession, and he had to take care of the demons. I mean, they're entitled to a king, and somehow it was him. And so he had to take care of them, and he had to do his duty, and his duty was to take care of them. And it wasn't his fault that Indra acted out of pride. That was Indra's fault. He got cursed to be poverty stricken. So he didn't even have to do a whole lot of fighting, just sort of march into heaven, take it over. So it's sort of like, the fall of Kabul. No one had to fight. They just marched in and took it over. There was no fight. Nothing went on. The 300,000 man Afghan army just switched sides. Just like that. I took a small bribe and they switched sides. Very small bribe, it turns out. And the president fled the country, and okay, they took it over. So it's kind of like that. So you might say Bali Maharaj taking over Indra's kingdom was like the Taliban taking over Afghanistan. There was nothing to do. You just kind of sort of marched in and raised your flag because there was that curse. So then he had his duty to take care of them. But also ultimately, he was a devotee of Vishnu. So Krishna arranged a very funny arrangement. And it sets a nice example for us that sometimes we're, like in India, there is the smart and the Brahmins. And the smart and the Brahmins are concerned about jati. They're very concerned about how you're born. Are you born in the right family? For example, I cannot go into the Jagannath Puri temple because my skin is too white. Others can go in. Bhakti Tirtha Swami, who was African American, went into the Jagannath temple, passing off as a South Indian. And when he was there, some of you know this story, the big gundas who beat up non-Hindus who go into the temple surrounded him and said, "Come with us." So he knew that meant they were going to take him in the back and pummel him. They wouldn't kill him, but they'd make life miserable. And so he said, okay, I guess. So he went with them. But what really happened is the pujaris had signaled him out and said, bring him to the front for special darshan. So, anyway, these things happen. So there's a certain, the smarter Brahmins are really into birthright, and are you born in the right group, and how are you born? And so the king has to take care of these people, but ultimately, as a devotee of Vishnu, he surrendered to Vishnu. So he was doing his duty as a king. He's taking care of these these people. They're Brahmins. I mean, there are Brahmins among the demons. He's taking care of them. But ultimately, he surrendered to Krishna. So that's kind of the lesson herein. I hope that
Thank you.
answers your question. But it's a very good question. Is that Kev? What's your name?
My name is Kevin, Prabhu.
Kevin. Oh, you're Kevin. Oh, I see you now. It's a tiny picture. I didn't recognize you. I'm sorry. You got your hoodie on. Oh, Kevin. Oh, happy to see you, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm glad to.
Oh, I'm very glad to see you. My old friend, he's one of my friends, Kevin. So, Kevin, what can I do for you?
So my question is, Indra seemed to have offended a devotee who, for the most part, seems to be grouchy often. How do we, is that because he is under the control of the modes of nature and that's just what had to happen? Or like, how do we protect ourselves from offending possibly a devotee who could be in a bad mood often?
Yeah, Kevin, you as usual, you asked a very insightful question. I'm dealing with that now. There's one, I won't mention a name, but there's one very senior devotee who's particularly grouchy. And so it's causing a lot of relationship troubles. And sometimes, one time, there's a Prabhupada story. I've told this before, but Bhakti True Swami, Prabhupada said to him, bring me some orange juice. And, you don't go open the fridge and pour some Tropicana in India. So he had to go to the market, find oranges, wash them, squeeze them. It took a long time. And by the time he brought it to Prabhupada, Prabhupada said, too late, I don't want it anymore. And Bhakti Swami just stood there very forlorn. His heart was so deep, and he just didn't know what to do. And he just stood there for a while. And eventually Prabhupada says, okay, I'll take it. And then later on, Prabhupada rang his bell and said, Bhakti Swami, don't be upset by this. Old men get grouchy. And Jagadish Prabhu has almost the identical story happen with him and Prabhupada. And now Prabhupada wasn't grouchy generally, but they said sometimes that happens. Somebody gets a little grouchy. I've had days where, for whatever reason, boy, am I a grouch. And so that happens. And there are some people who are just kind of grouchy all the time. So this is the human experience. There's just a variety. I find when I'm with someone who's particularly grouchy, what is Krishna teaching me? Krishna is forcing me into a level of humility I didn't know I had. And I do work with some people who get very, very grouchy. And some of you on here know what I mean. And when I work with people who get very grouchy at times, it forces me to squish my false ego. And it's good for me. I see that not a blade of grass moves without the control of the supreme personality of Godhead. So this is just Krishna forcing you, Kevin, to a certain sense of humility. Now, that doesn't mean if a temple leader is abusive, and we have temple leaders who are abusive at times, that should continue. And we went through that. I had told you the story before in New York from 1970, with a temple leader whose wife became extremely abusive to all the devotees, extremely abusive. And she reminded me again of Wizard of Oz, of the Wicked Witch of the West. So, and eventually she went away. And some brave devotees said, some ordinary devotees just tolerated the abuse and made a lot of advancement. And leaders who tolerated the abuse got chastised by Prabhupada, and leaders such as Gopal Krishna Grahasta then and Treya Rishi, who stood up and blocked the door and wouldn't let her and her husband, the temple, were praised by Prabhupada for protecting the devotees. So it depends on our position. So if we find a particular center or leader has become very abusive, sometimes as leaders get older, sometimes there's a mental problem. Sometimes somebody gets a blood clot in the brain and there changes their whole personality. Things happen. So other leaders have to stand up and say, you can't be abusive. But if I'm not one of the leaders and something abusive, I can reveal my mind to my senior God brothers and accept it as Krishna forcing me to be a little humbler. So each of us has a different role in this circumstances. The leaders should not tolerate abuse, and the followers should accept it as mercy. And that's how we all advance. Does that help answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much. To kind of just see what my role is in this situation.
Yeah, I see what your role is. And if your role gets to the point where I just can't take it, then you have to reveal your mind. I mean, the other thing I do besides BI is ISKCON Resolve. So every day, we're the sort of portable toilet from ISKCON. So all of these things come to us every day. We're the flushing mechanism. And so every day I'm hearing this. And, we have to just deal with each of the circumstances individually. As Ram Baru Dasi says, we have to become radical personalists. She puts it so beautifully. So we have to deal with everyone as an individual and see what the individual needs are. Those who are with Prabhupada, everyone who was, intimate with Prabhupada understood he was a radical personalist. There was one story I just read where two sannyasis were with Prabhupada, Akshayananda and Hamsadutta at that time. And Hamsadutta had a heavy way of management. And so Prabhupada, they're both in the room, Prabhupada said, "Why are you staying in one spot? You're a sannyas, you must be traveling. Don't just stay here. Just go and get a bus and travel and preach. You're a sannyas. Your duty is not to stay in one spot." Then he turns to Akshayananda, who is also a Swami. "Your duty is to stay in one spot and manage. This is your duty. Your duty is to preach." They gave opposite instructions on the same principle of sannyas dharma in the same room at the same time. I thought that was so wonderful seeing Prabhupada do that. That's called radical personalism, dealing with each one individually to what they needed. So we have to deal persons, because if we don't deal on a very personal level, then we become bureaucratic. And Prabhupada said bureaucracy is the enemy of Krishna consciousness, too much bureaucracy. And then we lose the loving relationships. Our movement is built simply on relationships, loving relations, and everything else is secondary. And somebody asked me, what's the most important book for devotees? Some will say the Bhagavatam, the Gita, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, they're all important. But in my mind, the Upadeshamrita is one of the most important books for devotees because it tells you how to have loving relationships. And if we don't have loving relationship with each other, I don't care who you are, your relationship with Krishna will be impaired. It's as simple as that. We have one more question. It says, Angel. Is that your name?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Hare Krishna. I wanted to ask, is it bad if I'm lying to myself, say, for instance, in the mornings, if I don't want to wake up at 5 in the morning, and I'm like, I tell myself, I love waking up at 5 in the morning, and I do love it. I don't really, so I lie to myself so that I can go to bed early and rise with the sun and everything so that I can be at peace. But I do ask for forgiveness to Krishna for lying, because I know that I'm just forcing myself to believe that I like to rise at a certain time.
Well, this is, again, let me see, maybe I can help with this. I have something here that might help with this. I remember when I was in the Army, you have to get up early. And when I had summer camp and then military training, there used to be a song we would sing in the morning. I'll play a piece of it for you. This might not help, but I'll play it. Here. Maybe this will make it worse, or maybe this will help. I don't know. We'll find out in a moment. Here it is, and we'll go.
Wake up! You gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up this morning.
I've been a soldier quite a while, and I would like to state the army food is with 97 others in a wooden hut. I love them all, they all love me, it's very lovely, but oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. Oh, how I'd love to remain in bed.
Okay, is that your song?
Yes.
So, I mean, it's not just you, but I mean, there are morning people and there are evening people. And for evening people, the movement is more difficult. for those of us who are evening people, we're given a certain extra austerity getting up in the morning. And there was that song, we used to sing that at summer camp. Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. It was popular at the time. And certainly the army and, the bugle blowing and sergeants yelling at you and all of that stuff. I'm surprised more sergeants didn't get shot, but that's another matter. And so that's just your little extra austerity. But the hard part is not getting up in the morning. The hard part is going to bed early. And that's the hard part. Each of us have tricks. My watch goes off at a certain time, and then another alarm goes off to tell me to go to bed. I don't always listen, but it's always, got to slow down the mind and all of these things. So some people it's easy, some it's hard, but you may have your personal austerity that way. And if you do, that's just your own personal challenge, and there are things you can do to make it work better. But if all else fails, you can do this. When you get up in the morning, the first thing you can do is offer your respectful obeisances. And the second thing you can do is sing the song, Oh, How I Hate to Get Up in the Morning. And you'll actually feel better after you sing it.
But I'm sorry.
Yeah, go on.
I'm more concerned about, I feel like when I'm lying to myself, I feel like I'm lying to God to some extent. And I don't want to get penalized for that. But I do rise, and then I apologize. I'm like, God, I'm just trying my best now. Sorry. Just tell morning.
Okay, well, there's a few solutions. One is you become Jewish and observe Yom Kippur and have a day atonement, get forgiven for your sins. So you can do that, and I do conversion. So anyway, but besides that, that's one way around it. But another way around it is you're not lying. It is what you're saying is coming from your heart. I can see it in your face. It's so sincere. You're just struggling with the mind. And Krishna talks about in the Gita how we're all struggling with our minds. He's telling Arjuna. Arjuna is saying, what happens if I'm not successful? Am I like a riven cloud? It all goes to waste? Because the mind, it's easier to control the wind than to control the mind. I mean, this is what Arjuna is saying. And Krishna is saying, no, it's not lost. Just stick to it, it works. And so all you're saying to me is your mind sometimes gets the better of you. Well, join the human race. I mean, that's what it's like. And all of us are fighting our mind. Bhakti Siddhanta said, in the morning, you beat your mind with your shoe, in the evening with a broomstick, or vice versa. And so all you're telling me is you have enough honesty of character to, in front of a room of, I don't know how many are listening because this is on YouTube, but in front of an audience that can be of any size, you're willing to stand in front of the audience and say very bravely, my mind makes it I'm not even honest with myself. That alone shows your sincerity. And that bravery and vulnerability alone means that you'll be successful. So you have nothing to worry about.
Thank you.
Just keep the path. Just follow what you're doing and it will work. And you just proved it yourself to all of us. So we're all witnesses that the rest of us, our mind is beating us up all day. You're the bravest one to say so.
Thank you.
Well done. Well, I think that's time now. It's 8:27 and I'm supposed to be on a phone call, GBC call at 8:15. So I think we'll stop here. And if there's any questions, somebody can write me. And I thank you very much for the honor and privilege of joining the Bhakti Center. And I want to say my inspiration for today's class was listening to 3 of Radha Swami's class on Vamanadeva. So there's a bunch of them out there. And it's on his weekly, was it the Radha Swami weekly something? It's on the weekly thing. So if any of you would like some good inspiration for Vamanadeva, there's these short 15-minute classes, a whole series on Vamanadeva. So that was my inspiration. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Haribol, thank you so much, Brahmatirtha Prabhu.
And nice to see you, Leela and Kevin and Angel and Yasoda and Andrea and everyone. And Gail, she's always a loyal class. And nice to see you all. Hare Krishna.
Haribol, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day in Krishna consciousness.
Wait, Prabhu, please don't close the chat yet. I just need, the Zoom, I need to get something from the chat, please. Just 1 second.
Okay, let me know.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.